Welcome to today's episode of our Dollars and Sense Podcast. If you are listening to the Dollars and Sense Podcast for the first time, it's a show where we get people to discuss some of the most interesting finance topics. And for today's episode, we are filming at a unique location. We are at OCBC Wisma Atria, and this is OCBC's largest integrated lifestyle and banking branch. If you haven't been here before, you should check it out. They have books, a cafe, a hidden omakase restaurant, and even artworks on display that you can purchase if you want to bring them home. OCBC is Singapore's oldest local bank. It was established in 1932 through the merger of three local banks: Chinese Commercial Bank, Ho Hong Bank, and Oversea-Chinese Bank. The Chinese Commercial Bank, the oldest of the trio, was founded in 1912. Today, OCBC stands as one of the biggest banks in Southeast Asia. But how did it get here, and how has OCBC evolved over the past century to become a financial powerhouse? And as always, joining me in today's discussion is Dinesh from our editorial team. Dinesh, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
OCBC has been around for such a long time, and obviously if you're watching this, it's likely older than you, it's older than us for sure. And to understand its history, we did some research from a book published by OCBC in 2017. The title is The Wind Behind the Sail and the Story of the People and Ethos of OCBC. So this is actually the book, and I got it from the library, and it's a very interesting book. So I just want to credit the author, Aaron Low. So it's more than 100 years of history. This is in the earlier 20th century. We have the post-independent period, and then the year 2000 onwards. So it's a long history, so let's get down to it. So I think the first thing we need to do is take a trip down memory lane, specifically to the year 1912, right? So at that time, Singapore didn't really exist as a nation, right? So a lot of times it's just referred to as Malaya. And how business was done, or at least in the banking industry was done, was that it was very divided by dialects, right? So people tend to stick to their own dialect groups. I think this is due to social interaction, doing businesses, and I think for the banking industry, no difference as well, right? So I'm a Hokkien, so the Hokkien Bank, for example, which primarily serve Hokkien merchants, while Cantonese businessmen would then work with Cantonese bank. So that's how it used to be in the earlier 20th century, right? So in the Hokkien community, three banks stood out. So the first one that I want to highlight is the Chinese Commercial Bank. So this is actually the oldest bank. They were established in 1912 by this gentleman, Mr. Lim Peng Xiang. He was about 40 years old when he founded the bank, which is the Chinese Commercial Bank, and he was one of the pioneers in terms of introducing the current account system to Chinese merchants and shopkeepers. So this system actually allowed them to earn an interest of 1% a year on their otherwise idle fund, right?
Yeah. I think at this point it's so interesting to note that, there were already established banks in Singapore since the mid-1800s, right? But most of these banks were all foreign banks, as you would have maybe learned in your
European banks, I believe.
Yeah,
right.
And also some Hong Kong banks, but maybe started from European settlers within Hong Kong itself, right? And as you mentioned, the interesting thing here is that most of these banks in the early days especially were like conduits for business transactions, not really meant for the man on the street yet. And a lot of the people who founded these banks were also, like you said, businessmen. They were businessmen themselves, and then they also started this other business venture, which was a bank, right? So, like Mr. Lim Peng Xiang, his other business interests include, from what I learned as well, shipping, oil, rice, cement, apart from his banking activities. And I also want to point out that actually OCBC can trace its roots even further back than 1912,
to
1907. When it acquired the Four Seas Communication Bank in 1972. That bank actually started out as, let me get this correctly, the Si Hai Tong Banking and Insurance Company for the Teochew community in 1907.
So how did that start?
Yeah, so I think we'll go through this in a bit during the acquisitions, but so in 1972, OCBC acquired the Four Seas Communication Bank, but this was its English name. It first started out in 1907 as the Si Hai Tong, which I think roughly translates to Four Seas in a way.
Right. Okay, I didn't think of that, but yeah, you might be right.
Yeah, so I think we'll probably go through it a bit later on. And as a last bit of trivia, the earliest local bank was actually a Cantonese bank, founded in 1903, but unfortunately it liquidated because of a bank run, which I think is a lot more common back then because we've not heard it in the recent times.
Yeah. And I mean, you're right, because after the onset of the First World War, the Chinese Commercial Bank was already started. But what happened was that it ran into some challenges, I think, during World War I, which was around 1980, if I'm 1914 to 1980, if I'm 1914 to 1918, right? There was apparently a run on the bank, and this forced some significant changes, and that led to Mr. Lim actually leaving the Chinese commercial bank, but he went back to banking afterwards because after that, he actually established a second bank in Singapore, which was the Ho Hong Bank, right? So just to give a little bit of context, the Ho Hong Bank, as what Dinesh you have mentioned, the Ho Hong was actually a Ho Hong group, right? So they actually had businesses in other areas.
Okay, yeah.
And so Ho Hong itself was already an established group with multiple businesses led by Mr. Lim Peng Xiang, and he actually established a second bank, which was the Ho Hong Bank in 1917 with about $2 million in capital, right? So the Ho Hong Bank, and this is also a trivia, was actually focusing on the foreign exchange trade, so forex essentially. And this is because, Singapore back then, there's a lot of trading in terms of commodities, and previously this area has been largely dominated by European banks, naturally. So actually, Ho Hong Bank was also started by the same gentleman as well. So you have the Chinese Commercial Bank, the Ho Hong Bank, and last but not least, it's Oversea-Chinese Bank, not to be mistaken for OCBC, which is Overseas Chinese Bank Corporation. This is Overseas Chinese Bank, right? So just OCB if you want the acronym.
Oversea. Right.
Oversea, yeah.
I always wonder whether that was a typo, but yeah.
Yeah, it's Oversea Chinese Bank, right? And it was established in 1919, so 1919. Among the three banks, it has the largest authorized capital of the three, so it has $20 million, and it aggressively moved to capture the foreign exchange market, and they set up branch across Malaya and places like Burma, Sumatra in Indonesia, and Amoy in China, right? And Ho Hong Bank itself, because of Ho Hong's established business operations across its group, they also had regional presence, if you want to put it in that way, because they had offices across Malaya from Muar to Penang and Malacca, so this is in today's modern days Malaysia. And he also ventured into Indonesia with branches in Palembang and Jakarta, right? They expanded into China as well with office in Shanghai and Hong Kong. So these are the three components that actually later on form OCBC. So 1920s in Singapore was actually a good time of economic growth, right? Because the stock market did well in the US as well as in Europe, right? So businesses prosper and trade flourish, right? So yeah, people were making money. And because of that, the three Hokkien banks, they expanded rapidly thanks to all this rising demand and the growth of the economy, right? So whenever the economy grows, there's more transactions, there are more value being created, and banks naturally grew. So what happened during that time, this is the Great Depression, I think around 1929, is that it started in the US, but it had a effect on the rest of the world, right? So what happened was that when you have a depression, demand goes down. Singapore was very involved back then in commodity trading, so things like tin, rubber, and when the prices of these commodity goes down, the businesses suffered. And when the businesses suffered, naturally one of the things that happened is that the bank itself doesn't do as well because people have cash flow problem, they have less money, they may not be able to repay their debts on time. And then what happened is that the bank started to have some challenges, and the logic back then was simple, right? So as individual banks, you may have that difficulty in terms of trying to survive the Great Depression, but collectively, if you come together and you form a stronger unit collectively, you might do well, you might survive the depression, and you might even thrive after that. And so that's what happened. The three local banks, which is the Chinese Commercial Bank, the Ho Hong Bank, and the Overseas Chinese Bank, came together to form OCBC. And that was in 1932.
That's interesting. We can think about this as like the first phase of the consolidation in the industry. Later on, we'll talk about the second phase, Yeah. So I think at this point, we transit into the period after the Great Depression, so about 1938 period, where we're going to be coming back into the story, right? So OCBC opened its first bank branch on Southbridge Road, which catered to the man on the street.
So I don't think it was the first bank branch. I think it was the first branch
that catered to the man on the street.
Yes, they had the department, a savings department, I think.
Correct. So I think, yeah, you're right. They had consumer banking divisions, which primarily were these two departments, right? So I think the intention of it was around the same, right? Maybe people didn't save physical money in the bank through safe deposits, but it was through this safe deposit where they could put jewelry, they could put maybe money in there, rather than with the bank. And then the second department was the hire purchase department, which I'm going to assume is kind of the loans department where, when they bought things, they get loans for these things and they have to pay back. So these were like quite innovative because it was the first time a local bank had solutions for the man on the street.
Yeah, because I think back then, we discussed earlier, a lot of the banks that were set up back then were actually directed towards merchants, businesses, and I think no one really focused on the consumers because perhaps the reasoning at that time was that consumers may not have as much money, so they are less likely to need banking services. But 1938, that's where we started seeing a little bit of focus to helping the working people save up money through the banks being created for their needs.
Correct.
I think one thing to note is that I think back then we can't think of Singapore as a country because it wasn't a country yet.
The 30s, it was definitely not yet.
Yeah, so it was more like a region, right? And I think a region where businesses and trades were just happening within the region. And you have banks like OCBC who were based in Singapore, but they were really more like regional players because they have operations naturally in the whole of Malaya, China, Indonesia as well. A few things happened, right? Some of the operations and more importantly, some of the assets were actually moved, I would say offshore in a way to other countries before the Japanese actually invaded Singapore.
Correct. So this kind of showed you how forward-thinking OCBC has been. They knew like a strife was probably coming, and they wanted to move the assets out of Singapore. So they didn't, from what I read, they didn't actually lose that much money
during the war,
during the occupation itself, right? And even during the occupation years, right? OCBC continued to function as a bank, with the daily operations, deposit taking, lending operations, and
under the Japanese occupation,
during the war years, this continued, right? And one of the most interesting thing, really underscoring OCBC as a bank that wants to go beyond the local shores, right? So it transferred its head office to Mumbai, India for a short period as well. I think before we started rolling, you said they had several destinations in mind, with China and Indonesia being some of them.
Well, the bank did survive the war period, and they did take some losses as well, right? Because they were involved in, I think back then they call it the banana money. I'm not sure if
banana notes.
Banana
the
notes.
Japanese issue.
Yeah,
to the local settlements.
Some of you, if you studied in Singapore, you will know from our social studies textbook, right? So I think the banana notes were actually worthless after the war, and naturally the banks have the money because they are banks, so they have some of these notes which became worthless. So I think they did take some losses during that period in terms of the different currencies and how they are no longer valued, but they survived the war. I think that's the most important thing. Post-war was not really an easy period as well, right? Post-war till Singapore independence was not really an easy period as well. The banks at that point in time, the Singapore banks, or rather even the European banks that were operating in Singapore, they started, playing a very important role in helping the economy recover, to rebuild Singapore.
Yep.
In the early days, you think of the banks as a place to put money in to safekeep funds. They were like custodians of funds. But post-war, post-Singapore independence as well, their role kind of changed, right? Because as the economy grow, the role of a bank is vital because the bank itself will be the one that is funding the growth, right? Through the loans, maybe even through some investments as well. Yeah. And they have to be mindful, they have to be clear about what kind of businesses they want to lend money to. Mm-hmm. Because if you just lend money to everyone, which you can if you just want to earn an interest, but if the loan defaults, that is where you would actually make a loss on your money, and that would actually not be good, right? So I think that is one of the areas which, as a bank, as OCBC, being around since the pre-war days, they played that vital role in helping Singapore's economy grow, right? So economic growth, as we know, is a virtuous cycle, right? Virtuous cycle. So what happens is that when businesses do well, they hire more people. When they hire more people, they pay them better. Individuals also now have money. Individuals also now have expectations, or they want access to banking services because they have jobs, they want to save, they want to invest for the future. There was this demand for individual banking services, which is what we call today consumer banking. Yeah. But it really started during that time, during the post-independence period. And here's some numbers to give you an example, right? Yeah. So saving deposits at OCBC in 1967, so this is 2 years after independence, was about 302 million. In by 1973, the figure has more than doubled to 708 million, right? So, this really underscores the demand that people have when it comes to something simple, just like saving their money in a bank.
So the second innovation that OCBC actually pioneered again was in 1958. They introduced mobile banking. It was not mobile as in mobile phones, but it was mobile as in automobiles.
Right, so literally mobile.
Yeah. So on a bus, it went through the estates in Singapore, especially those that maybe didn't have a branch.
Yeah.
And I think many heartland estates didn't have a branch back
So
then.
so that was 1958.
1958, correct. So imagine a bank on wheels just going to different estates, and some of the estates that actually came up were like Joo-Chiat, I think one of the main suburbs that we went to.
Yeah, I think one of the things to note is that like back then, I think today we take it for granted, but back then when you need banking services, banks are literally the bank branch.
Yeah.
Right? So you are not going to access anything that it has to do with banking services if you do not have a bank branch.
Correct.
Right. And I think what happened back then was that as the Singapore's residential population expand and we move beyond the city centre, you have all these suburbs, across the island that have people living in it, and if they do not have a bank branch there, they don't have access to banking services.
And obviously the next best thing came online a little bit after that, so in August 1980, OCBC installed its first ATM, right? So it was not the first bank to do it in Singapore, but it quickly embraced it. And I think today, we would know that we can withdraw money from OCBC ATM. 2 local banks are on that platform. And interesting trivia again, the third local bank actually came out of that system to form its own ATM network rather than, they started off differently in the first place.
Yeah, so that's one thing that I thought was quite interesting in the sense that, before the introduction of ATMs in Singapore, getting money in or out of a bank or making any banking transaction means having to walk into a physical bank branch, probably having to queue up for a really long time, especially if you go during lunch period, I would assume, or on Saturdays where you don't have to go to work. And the introduction of the ATM, what it did for the banking industry in Singapore cannot be understated, because ATMs essentially are 24/7, right? So they allow you to perform, I would say, basic banking transactions, like just withdrawing money or depositing money or transferring it to your friend without having to go into the bank branch, queue up in line, talk to a bank teller, which will all take a lot of time, and I would like to add, may not exactly be high value transactions anyway, right?
Yeah,
so that significantly reduced the cost for the bank while improving its productivity, its efficiency,
convenience to the customers,
and definitely convenience to the customer as well. OCBC was the first bank, and I think till to date, if I'm not wrong, the only bank that still opens some of its bank branches on Sunday to provide banking services on Sunday for people
like us actually. I mean, imagine a bank opening the same hours as you are working, and then the minute you start work, the bank starts, and then you can't go there.
Yeah.
Then the minute you end work, the bank closes, then you can't go there again.
Yeah.
So that just leaves the lunch hour, right?
Yeah, and you work on Saturday, so you can't go to the bank on Saturdays as well because you're on a 6-day work week. So Sunday is the only day where you have a bit more time to make bigger transactions, because even lunchtime is not very long.
Yeah,
right.
And so you wait for that long queue, and then sometimes you just go in. I think in the early days, you just go in, you see the queue, and you just walk back out.
Maybe for you,
you're not going to.
I know my mom will queue up though because it's an important transaction. So I think a lot of this innovation we take for granted today is actually quite important, and they remain relevant today. Actually, I would say, and it's really part of our heritage. When we talk about how the early days of banking has transformed the banking industry and bring us to where it is today, right? I just want to add one more thing, which I thought was really important in the 90s in post-independent Singapore to help OCBC grew, and that was M&A work, right? So we always hear of merger and acquisition and how it might be challenging, how it might help a company if you can only integrate it in the right way. But M&A work was actually really strategic for OCBC in terms of expanding itself to what it is today, right? So in the past, there were a lot of small banks, right? Because every business owner, they started their own local banks. So there were a lot of small banks, but it was very fragmented because none of them were very big. You just have many small banks, maybe serving their community at where they are operating within. So even as a small country, in a way, it's kind of illogical to have many small banks serving a small country as opposed to having just a few strong players who can serve the community well. And I think banking is also one of those things where the logic is that the bigger a bank is, the more robust it becomes because it has access to depositor base, it's more stable, and that means its cost of capital would likely be lower than, say, a smaller bank trying to be competitive.
Bigger is better.
Bigger is better when it comes to banking, right? So, and also different verticals, I would say, especially if you want to expand regionally, which a lot of Singapore companies, they are also present regionally, right? So for example, if you're a local SME in Singapore and you use OCBC for your business banking needs in Singapore, you would naturally prefer to also have the option to use OCBC when you expand overseas, say to Malaysia. So I want to set the context here as well. I think one of the things that MAS also required banks, I think this was sometime in the late 90s, where to ensure that the local banks in Singapore are actually going to be strong banks, there was a minimum shareholder fund requirement of 1.5 billion that they set. So that's 1.5 billion. I think previously it was 800 million, so they increased it to 1.5 billion. And from what I understand, at that point in time, only 4 banks in Singapore, so this is DBS, OCBC, UOB, and OUB would have met that requirement, right? So one interesting thing to note was that in 1998, a couple of acquisition M&A work was made, right? So Keppel Bank acquired Tuck Lee Bank, right, through a share swap, and basically they became Singapore's 5th largest bank, Keppel Tuck Lee Bank, right? And in 2001, OCBC acquired Keppel Tuck Lee, which was the smallest of the 5 local banks, and this acquisition essentially helped OCBC expand its position in the market. Prior to that, there was also an acquisition, and I think you mentioned this company right at the start of history, or at least in today's episode, which was 4C Communication, right? So OCBC actually acquired 4C Communication in 1972, and yes, you know, the bank was originally founded in 1907 under a different name,
which is the Chinese name, right?
The
Si Hai Tong,
right?
Yeah.
And 4C actually maintained its autonomy in its operations after 1972, but it was fully integrated under the OCBC umbrella, I suspect because of MAS requirement.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. And that also helps OCBC expand its reach and depositor base, right? So you have 4C Communication, you have Keppel Tuck Lee, and then there's more acquisition M&A work as well. So in 2009, OCBC acquired ING Asia Private Bank, which was a significant move that led to, later on, the launch of Bank of Singapore. So these private banking subsidiaries then now catered to the high net worth individual and wealthy families, most importantly across Asia, Greater China, India, and other international markets. So that's the private banking market as well.
Yeah.
So you have the consumer banking, you have the private banking, and of course you have business banking as well, right? So that's kind of like within Singapore, but outside of Singapore, there were also other expansion and M&A work, right? So OCBC acquired Wing Hang Bank in 2014, gaining access to a strong offshore yuan funding base and expand its presence to Hong Kong, Macau, and the Pearl River Delta. At that time, it's the largest cross-border bank deal within Asia, excluding Japan, in the past decade. So this also contributed to OCBC performance in the region. So just for context, as of financial year 2023, last year, Greater China account for about 13% of OCBC's total income of about 1.774 billion. Right, OCBC also became the first Singapore bank to acquire a banking stake in Indonesia with the acquisition of 22.5% stake in Bank NISP, right? So this was in the early 2000s, but it has since increased its stake over the years to the current 85%, and today you know it as OCBC Indonesia, right? So I think the main point is that all these strategic acquisitions and mergers not only expanded OCBC footprint within Singapore, but also outside of Singapore, and it strengthened its capabilities and allowed it to serve a bigger, more diverse group of customers, and essentially allowed the bank to expand through M&A work as well in the 90s all the way to early 2000.
Yeah, and also become a regional banking player, right, for Singapore Bank.
Yeah, but I think the main thing to know is that they always had bank branch across the region, but acquiring some of this overseas bank allowed it to have the banking license it needed to run as a bank in those countries as well. So I think there has been a few digital transformation that OCBC as well as Singapore has undergone over the last 20 years or so, and you can think of it in a few areas. I think one of the things really could be mobile banking, right? So this is
The one in your pocket this time.
the one in your pocket, the phone, right? This is mobile phone, right? Not the bus
wheels.
not the bus anymore, right? So mobile banking is really something that's transformed the banking industry in Singapore. And let's just go back to 2006, about 18 years ago. OCBC actually launched OCBC mobile banking, right? So I think it is a major milestone, and when you think about it, because it is really the first time when banking or mobile banking means banking is everywhere with you now, right? Because as long as you have the phone, you can access the bank. If you can access the bank on your phone, you can access your funds, you can make fund transfer, bill payments, and all these other, or make investments on your phone, right? So that really transformed the industry, right? So with OCBC mobile banking, you essentially have the virtual bank on your mobile device, and with a few clicks on your phone, you can just access your account in real time.
Great. I think at this point, I'll just list out some of the firsts in OCBC's mobile banking history, right? Like what you mentioned, launch mobile banking app across the 3 mobile networks in Singapore. So that's Singtel, StarHub, M1. Then in 2008, it also launched mobile banking application for iPhone, so across different phones now, the hardware devices, right? And then in 2009, it offered EasyLink top-up via its mobile banking, and it launched a mobile banking for BlackBerry, so adding another device to...
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I used to have a BlackBerry phone when I was...
I never had a BlackBerry, so I don't understand.
So this was an app for the BlackBerry, right?
And then offered prepaid mobile banking, mobile top-up via its mobile banking app. OCBC also launched its Android mobile banking app in 2011. So that's after iPhone.
Finally, the Android came.
Yeah, the Android came.
Yeah, I think the point is that, all these things that we take for granted today on our phone, whether you are on Apple or, Android, when we were students, we didn't have these things.
Yeah.
Right? And it took a lot of technology innovation over the years.
So across service providers, across devices as well, and even
across the internet, the way the way your phone connects to the internet also had to evolve, right, in order to support these functions and services.
Yeah. And in 2014, in another groundbreaking...
So we're moving away from mobile banking to payments now, right?
Payments, yeah, but also within mobile.
Within mobile phone
itself, right? OCBC launched OCBC Pay Anyone.
Right, I remember that.
Which was quite a nice service because you could start withdrawing money from the ATM without your bank card itself.
It's actually the first time I used the OCBC Pay Anyone for. If you guys remember, it was before Pay Now.
Okay, I think why Tim is saying if you remember is because all of these functions have been integrated into the main digital mobile OCBC app today. So Pay Anyone does not exist, it's been integrated. I guess back when it exists,
Pay Anyone I think it was introduced in 2014, right? And Pay Now came a few years later only. The other thing which I didn't realize was that last year, September 2023, OCBC actually launched Alipay Plus.
It is main digital banking
on the Pay app now, right? Yeah. Because I was in Hong Kong earlier this year, and I thought, that I got my Visa card, that should be good enough.
Yeah.
And I realized that yes, it's cashless, but it's not cashless for Visa or MasterCard or Amex, right? So you have Alipay, I think you have WeChat as well.
Yeah.
Right? So I was in Hong Kong and I was trying to go into some of these restaurants and I realized I couldn't pay because I didn't bring enough cash, and they accept card but not Visa or MasterCard.
Okay.
Right, but what I didn't know at that point in time, or rather earlier this year, was that if you open your OCBC app today, you can actually use Alipay Plus to transact.
Okay, so it's all integrated. You don't have to download a third-party app.
No, it's not a third-party app. So it's integrated in your OCBC app right now, and in the scanning function, there's the same scanning function that you use for Pay Now, right?
Great.
So that is what you do. So that's super convenient, and the exchange rate is very competitive, and no additional fee or charges as well, right? So wow, yeah.
I mean, another thing is that I recently needed to use the AXS machine as well to make some payments, which only exists on the AXS machine for some reason. Right? So I was like, now I have to make my way down to a physical AXS machine, queue up. But thankfully, the OCBC app, again, has integrated AXS payments within the app.
Right.
So you don't really have to go out of it. You can do it all on your phone.
Yeah. It really feels like the future, or rather the current state of banking technology, is the ability to not just use technology that the bank has introduced, but even integrate its functionality with other technology providers across the world, especially as nowadays we travel often. I don't really want to use another travel or rather another payment technology based overseas, if I'm just going there for once a year, right? I don't want to download an app. I don't want to have that whole infrastructure to worry about.
Yeah.
So to have it all on your phone and a secure app, it really is somewhat convenient and feels like the future, right?
I mean, I've not used that function that you described in Hong Kong, but like if the exchange rate is great, then all the more the consumers want to use it.
So the feature is particularly beneficial for travelers to China, right, where cashless payment and QR code payments are widely adopted. I'll add in Hong Kong as well, because that feels like the same way as well when you visit Hong Kong as well. And now with OCBC's integration with Alipay Plus, Singaporeans can also enjoy a hassle-free and secure payment experience abroad, leveraging on the convenience of their local banking app.
And good foreign exchange.
Good foreign exchange rate as well. If you're traveling, you want that also, naturally. And thank you so much, Dinesh, for your time today sharing your thoughts. I think we went through a lot of research, and it's been a very informative session. We're here at the OCBC Wisma Atria bank branch, so if you ever have time, you're in Orchard Road, check it out. There is lots of books, kids books. I see also a lot of finance books as well as board games. I'm just looking right in front of some board games as well.
And many of you listening, you will hear maybe a beeping sound. That's the coffee machine that we're going to get after this.
Yeah, and I'm going to open a bank branch soon as well. Thank you for joining us on the Dollars and Sense podcast today. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're going to be around the Orchard area, feel free to pop in to OCBC Wisma Atria. There is books, a cafe, omakase restaurants, and a lot of things for you to just browse through if you are here. And thank you, Dinesh, for joining as well. And we hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. See you guys.